This is important, okay? As a matter of fact, I'm gonna need you to respect your elders, okay? I'm so fucking serious right now. If this movie has 0 fans, I am dead in a ditch. I was 8 years old when I watched Mufasa get mowed down, and you know what I said? That's life. But this movie, 5 tears out of each eye, just streaming down my face. Ugly crying, sobbing. If you didn't get it, if you didn't get the message behind this film, this video is for you. The entire movie hinges on the opening sequence. The opening sequence is a montage of a little girl's childhood, and it seems so cute until you start to put the pieces together as the montage progresses. Everything is not what it seems. There is something really dark happening here. The little girl's mother is sick, and as the montage progresses, her mother is getting sicker and sicker until we cut to the beginning of the movie, and we're not even told that this little girl's mother died. The opening sequence of this movie is so layered and is conveying so many concepts. This little girl had to grow up without her mother, and that in and of itself is tragic enough. The second layer to that is the fact that her parents, although well-meaning, obviously, and although they loved her so much, obviously, they wrongfully believed that the best thing they could do for her was pretend everything was okay. She had 2 engaged parents that were like putting on puppet shows and dancing, and her parents were like committed to the bit of being silly, goofy, completely shielding her from any discomfort, any sadness, any sort of ugliness. They were trying to completely shield her. And I'm gonna tell you, as a child of a single mother who did everything she could to pretend everything was okay, the tragic thing about trying to shield a child from any pain and any discomfort is that you are gaslighting them. You are invalidating their feelings. You are making them feel unseen and unheard. And it's so tragic to me, the idea that these parents loved this little girl so much and were trying so hard to make everything magical, and yet she still grew up to be a 12-year-old dark, cynical little girl. When the movie starts, her dad is sick. John Krasinski plays the dad, and he's doing the cute little circus act that we saw in the beginning montage. You could see that he's still that same guy, trying to protect his daughter, trying to shield her. He's always wearing regular clothes. He never lets her see him in the hospital gown. He's never laying in the bed. He's always pretending that he's fine. That is a huge character flaw, to never allow yourself or others to acknowledge that something horrible is going on, to never be able to have a truthful conversation with your daughter. But 2 things could be true at the same time. He could be an incredible, wonderful, loving father and get it wrong in that sense. You know, as the viewers, we don't even know what's wrong with him because he doesn't even describe it. He has a shirt with a little image of a broken heart, and he just tells his daughter, like, my heart's a little broken, but the doctors are gonna fix it. And he's still doing the bit, and he's still missing the point that what his daughter needs in that moment is to be seen and heard, that it was so traumatic for her to lose her mom, and that she has every right to be terrified at the idea that her dad is now sick and also in the hospital. But we don't see an emotional little girl in this movie. We see a very put together, rational, what looks like a miniature adult. She even goes out in the middle of the night to buy a charging cord for the camcorder. She is having to move back to her childhood home where her grandmother now lives, back surrounded by all those memories, and in the exact same situation of having a parent that's really sick and facing the idea that she might lose him. You could see her steeliness in the movie, how this little girl is prepared to say goodbye to her dad. She is ready. And the grandmother is doing her best to kind of say, everything's fine. Like it's the surgery is simple. Everything is going to be okay. Side note, they live in this giant freaking apartment in New York City. And let me tell you, they got money. So yeah, I think he's going to be fine. I think he has top-notch medical care. Like, he's going to be fine. But I also thought it was heartbreaking to consider the fact that the grandmother, she was facing the prospect of losing her son. The father that's sick in the hospital, he's facing the prospect of leaving his daughter an orphan. Where do the imaginary friends come in? The fact that she can now see the imaginary friends, that is explained. because at the end of the movie, we see how grown adults are able to sense and feel their imaginary friends once they're taken back to that time in their life. What I find charming about the concept of the imaginary friends is that every single imaginary friend is like a preposterous idea that a child came up with, such as like there's one that's like literally a glass of water with a single ice cube in it. Like that's the imaginary friend. And there's one that's like invisible. Like it was like literal invisible imaginary friend, which is like probably the type of imaginary friend I would have had as a kid because I was like too practical to like imagine an actual like entity. I would just be like, you're an imaginary friend, so you literally need to be invisible. I found it charming that every single imaginary friend was exactly what that specific child needed. And I found it charming that the movie initially made us believe that it was going to be about these imaginary characters finding new kids to help. But ultimately, what it ended up being about is the fact that the adults all these children grew up to be still need them and just have to be reminded. One of the last scenes in the movie, the montage of all of the imaginary friends reconnecting with their children who are now adults. That was the point in the movie where there were literally like 5 tears coming out of each eye. There were so many layers to that scene that just made me emotional. The first one was that not a single adult was surprised to see their imaginary friend. I expected them to be like, oh my God, like, whoa, I thought you didn't exist. Every single adult, when they saw their imaginary friend again, they just smiled. It was just a nostalgic, all of it coming back, a smile, a sense of safety. Oh my God, I knew you were here all along. I knew you were real. Literally getting choked up just thinking about it. But you know what made me emotional about that scene was when I had this thought of like, man, I really needed an imaginary friend growing up. And what the fuck? I'm literally getting choked up thinking about it. When I tell you 5 tears like out of each eye, ugly crying, sobbing. I'm like, I needed an imaginary friend. Like I needed one so bad growing up. Sobbing, had to walk out the theater before the lights came on. I was so embarrassed. And then later on driving home, I had a second thought where I realized like, what if I had one and I forgot them? And that was like so much more tragic. And then I was like sobbing all over again. The story itself was predictable for me in the sense that I could see where it was going pretty early on, so I wasn't shocked by anything that ended up being revealed later. However, that's not the point, right? Just because I can guess where a story is going doesn't mean that story is wrong. It just means that I am able to spot patterns because I've watched a lot of movies. I wanted to come on here and defend this movie because it's so much more than just a movie about imaginary friends. It's a movie about moving through trauma. It's a movie about coping mechanisms because an imaginary friend is a coping mechanism. And it's so adorable and magical, the idea that our psyches could invent an entire being whose sole purpose is to help us move through the world in a way where we feel safe and seen and heard. And you can imagine why this little girl's imaginary friend ended up being who they were. I want you to really sit with that, who her imaginary friend was and who he represented. Who did he represent? Okay, all right. I will ride or die for this one. And it's fine. We can still be friends if you don't like it. And you know what? I might be wrong about this, but I think this movie's going to stand the test of time. There's like this subtlety to it. These kids that are watching it today will go back and watch it 20 years from now and be like, oh my God, I didn't even realize how dark this movie was. And that's happened to all of us. Like, let's be real. There's so many movies that were like made for kids that we go back and watch now and we're like, whoa, this was dark. That to say, I really love this movie and I implore you to go watch it in the theaters. And I implore you to give it another chance if it didn't hit the first time. Just really sit with it. Like sometimes we can have like a very strong negative reaction to things when they like kind of touch the wrong button in our psyche. And sometimes we need to sit with things a little more. I don't feel very passionate about very much. Okay. Like, look, you see that reflection? That's an artificial light, okay? Because there's no light inside. And so the fact that this movie has made me feel so much, the proof is in the pudding, okay? Comment below and tell me if you watched this movie and what you thought of it.